let's continue on. I'm not going to spend much time on this chapter, but believe it or not, what I am going to talk about a little bit in here are arrays. But most of the rest of it we're going to go through fairly quickly. All right. So I'm taking for granted you know what those things mean. I've already talked about the triple equal sign and the not double equal sign. All right, and those are the ones I'm going to expect you to be using. So there's nothing new there. You should by now all know about and or and not. There's nothing magical about those. Know how to code an if. Like I said, I'm not trying to waste my time or your time here. I want to talk about the stuff and go over the stuff that we're going to need to be able to use. Okay. Now, again, I'm taking for granted that you are all comfortable writing a regular for loop. That said, there is a for in, there is a for of, and there is a for each. We're going to be looking at those either later this week or on Monday of next week. All right. So they've got this enhanced miles per gallon. So if you were having problems with yours, again, you could look at it. Probably this one won't help you too much. Future value, enhanced test scores. All right, so let's jump into this, working with arrays. Now, this summer, I sent you links to some stuff I did and links to some other stuff that's out there. That said, I kind of do that with the expectation that few of you are probably going to read that stuff during the summer because it's the summer. All right? And I probably end up doing more work during the summer than I would normally just because of the fact they pay me, the way that it works here. The school I used to work at, you left beginning of May, you didn't come back till the end of August. Now, I still came back, but some people, that's what they did. I wish we were more like that here, but I've been very fortunate for the last couple of years. Mr. Corrigan has let me do most of my work during the summer at home. Don't know if that's going to continue. I think a lot of them depend on COVID and whatever. But let's talk about arrays. You should be aware of the fact there's two ways that you can create an array. Virtually no one that I know does it that way. Why? Because it's just too much typing. They do it like this. And again, remember, you can make an array a constant and still change the values that are inside of it. All right? So you typically see things like what are shown right here. Okay? Now, once you do this, you can change those numbers. To my knowledge, you can't go and add total sub 3. You see what I'm saying? Where it would make the array bigger? You cannot do that. I don't believe you can. All right? The dot length still works. Looks exactly the way we talked about, and worked with before. There are a lot of new array methods. All right? And what I'm probably going to end up doing is, since we're not going to talk about it until at least, I would think, at least Friday, but we'll see. Maybe we'll even start getting them tomorrow. I've got a bunch of handouts that I'm just going to give you as electronic documents. But what I've been doing is based on those and some other stuff, I've been kind of creating a worksheet of my own. So if you don't know what the rest operator is, if you don't know what the spread operator is, if you don't know what the reduce operator is, all right, and I'm assuming that you probably don't, then that's what we're going to be learning about. It lets you do a lot of neat stuff with arrays. There's a map operator. You can take an array. So let's say that I create an array and it's got, I don't know, a bunch of test scores in it. And I want to go through that whole array and I only want to grab the people who failed, let's say. So I can do a map which creates a new array based on criteria that I give it. So I could say, test score less than or equal to 70 or something like that. And it would make a new array where it would just pull those up. All right? Because most of the stuff that's discussed in here, I think at least, maybe you agree, maybe you don't, this is pretty simple stuff. This is stuff, now you might have to go back and review it, But there's really nothing in there that should surprise you, overwhelm you, or anything else. Again, maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. If I am, you're going to have to let me know, I guess. So here's the for in and for of loops. Now, for in and for of, you can use both of those on what are called collections. And a collection is basically a data structure. All right? And a data structure means that it's something more complex. You can use both of these with arrays. So let's take a look at the examples that are in here. Let's look at the first example, the one that says their code that totals the numbers in the array using a for in loop. Then we'll look at the for of. They don't look that different. All right, but they a little bit. So the first one, for, let I in totals. What's totals? Totals is the array. I is a variable you make up on the fly. That's all it is. All right. In fact, a lot of times what you'll see in here is, instead of seeing it like that, you'll see let sum equal 0, then it'll say for let total singular in totals plural. So a lot of people will only take their names and they will always pluralize them. They'll put an S on the end. Then when they use local variables like that, they'll have the singular version of the name. You don't have to do it like that. They didn't do it like that in here, but a lot of people do it like that. So what does that say? Well, notice that sum is 0 when you start. So if you had 3 scores in there, if you had 10, 20, and 30, then it's going to say sum is 0 plus the first one, which would be 10, 10 plus the second one, which is 20. All right, 30 plus the third one. Okay, so the whole thing would be 60. It's not a big surprise what they're doing. All right, but it's a little more compact. You can still use a regular for loop. And a lot of people that I know still do. They're just used to writing a for loop, plus this isn't available in every language. All right, so let's look at these two together. So now notice, well, they used val there, but really what's the difference? It's more internal what happens than anything else. So as they say here, for in and for of are used to loop through the elements in an array without having to explicitly declare and increment a counter, which is what we have always done. In the for in, it says you declare a variable that stores the index of the current item. All right, with the for of, you're working with the value of the current item. But they do work the same way. When you look right here, okay, they don't really look very different. All right, and sometimes they can be used interchangeably. In fact, most of the time they can be used interchangeably, I would say. All right. So they've got this test scores application within the array. I'm not going to go through that. Let's jump right into chapter 4. All right. How to work with JavaScript objects, functions, and events. All right. I would say that this is one of those chapters that if you are going to go back and look at it, I would look at least this events section and probably the function section in here. Why? Because some of the ways that we're going to do things in here are going to look different than the way they have in the past. Now, what do I mean? I want to show you. I don't want to just say something. I want to show it to you. So let me hit enter a bunch of times. I'm going to leave this up here. You're used to things like this. If I come in here and I say int a equals 7, int b equal 10, int c equal, I'm making these numbers up, they have no meaning, int d equals 13, all right? And then I'm going to say here int sum1 equals add 2 and pass in a and b. Int sum2 equals add 2, and you're going to pass in c and d. This is simple stuff. You all know this. But what we've been used to doing in the past is something like this. Function, add 2, num1, num2. Return num1 plus num2. And it still works. Not a problem with that. looking at that, that should make sense to all of you. In fact, we could have even said, instead of even creating a variable here, we could have said, oops, what did I do there? We could have said console.log, and we could have called the function directly there. We don't have to even, oops, we wouldn't have even had to have created a variable. All right? So literally, if we run that, that's going to print out, what, 7 plus 10, 17. All right, well, the advantage is we don't have to create a variable to do it. And I could have done the same thing here. Like that.
So we'll load the function first, and then it'll go through.
It runs the function first because it works with a parenthesis, so it works from the inside out. So first thing it does is it says what's A and what's B. It figures out that those are 7 and 10. Then it calls add 2, and instead of A, it passes a 7. Instead of B, it passes a 10. And then it returns those two. Then it does the console log on the sum.
Well, I'm asking about the loading, because I remember earlier we were talking about loading, and you can't call a variable before.
But those aren't variables. There's no variable right there. That's just logging the answer.
Because you're calling that function before you.
Right here. Oh, I see what you're saying. We're calling the function here before we've declared it. That's okay. It's variables that get hoisted. It's not functions themselves. All right. So we could also write that basically like something like, I'm trying to think of the best way to do this. We could have said like let sum equal, and you can say function. We could have passed in num1 and num2 and return num1 plus num2. Now, why am I showing you this? Well, you say, why are you wasting our time? No, I'm not. Okay? What this will do, this is creating a function. Remember, JavaScript is weird in a lot of ways. You can treat functions like variables. All right? So we're creating this variable here. It is a variable called sum, but we're setting it equal to the result of a function. All right? Again, why am I showing you that? Because this is actually considered more old school today, and I want to show you because it's typically rewritten like this. And the reason I'm showing you this now is you're going to be doing this hundreds of times in this class. You're going to be creating what are called arrow functions. All right, so you say something like sum equals, you no longer put the word function in. All right, you put in your parameters, num1, num2, and since you're just returning something, we could put this on another line. I could do this, and I could do it exactly like this. So I could grab this, and I could do it just like this. And it works just fine. It's totally legit, totally legal. But since it's only one line, we don't need curlies. So we can put it on the same line. And since it's a return, return is implied. So we can rewrite that like that. And we don't need that there. But we do need a semicolon. And I mean, I think you can look at that and see the compactness. All right? And, you'll see in books today, some will still write it the older way like this, but more and more they're moving to this. To make it even simpler, let's just pretend for a second this isn't the case. But if there's only one parameter, so if there was only num1 here, let's say we were saying like num1 times 2. We were having a function called double. So we were going to double it. Then you don't even need to put the parameter inside of parentheses. You still can, but you don't have to. Okay? Now you might look at that and go, that just really whoops, that would have to be times 2, wouldn't it? You might look at that and say, that's just really screwy. You can still do it this way. There's nothing wrong with doing it this way. Many textbooks still show it like that. But many other ones are showing it more and more like this. I just wanted you to know that. All right? Now that isn't something, that's something that I think if it's discussed in here, won't be discussed till the end of the book, in those last 2 or 3 chapters. All right? there's nothing in here that we need to talk about right now. I'm just, like I said, I want to be done by, I'm going to shoot for about 2:15 at max. All right, so I'm going to give you some time to work on that assignment that I gave you. But you know what the document object is. This is going to be important. You all, I'm asking you this question, and if I'm wrong, let me know. So if I've gone and I've created a form, all right, and let's just say, so I've got a form, and on that form, I've got, I don't know, I've got a text box in there that I call first name, okay? I give it an ID, so I'm not going to write the whole thing, but it's got an ID that's equal to first name. Oops, oh, I got down there, but that finger. Okay. I'm taking for granted that you all understand that if we go in and we create that alias, or if we don't, let's say we don't. All right. So that this would be in HTML. All right. But when I get down to JavaScript, let's pretend we're not even going to use that. We're not even going to use that alias. So we could come in here and say, let first name equal document dot get element by ID, and we give it the name, first name. Now, my hope is that all of you understand what that's doing. That is going back to the HTML. It is finding something that has an ID in it of first name, okay? In fact, if I did that, I probably would say dot value. It's grabbing the value of that and it's putting it into that variable. Does that make sense to everybody? All right, so why, if it does, then why the heck are you telling us that, Jeff? Well, when you look in here, query selector works the same way. It finds the first one that's in there, okay? And so look, there's a query selector and there's a query selector all. So let's say that we ran the query selector and we did it, let's say we had a bunch of paragraphs that had the same ID. So we put in that ID here for that selector. You would find just the first one. Query selector all finds all of them. All right? And that's the difference. Now, it returns them, but it returns them, I believe it at least, it returns them in a thing that's like an array, but it's not an array. All right? I believe it returns those in what's called a node list. And you can use it in some ways like an array, in some ways not like an array. We're going to be looking at that pretty soon. But when you look right here, notice, I guess I should have used their example. All right. I thought you had to say dot value here, but I could be wrong. They don't use it, so maybe I was wrong. All right. So who cares? You know, can I still keep using get element by ID if I want? Yes. But there are other things that you can use as well. That's the bottom line. That's what we're getting to in here. All right. Text box and number objects aren't, I'm not saying they're not important. You should understand the focus, etc. There shouldn't be anything in there that we need to really worry about or even have to go back and take a look at, to be honest. All right. Same with data string. All right, so functions. Again, first thing they show in here is what we've been talking about. Just a typical function declaration like this. Again, nothing new in there. All right. Notice here's another one, a function declaration with one parameter that returns a DOM. This is similar to the kind of thing that we did previously. You are using that $sign instead of document.querySelector in this example. All right. You know what a function is, should know what a function is, you should know what function parameters are, etc. There's nothing that's really new in there. Now, what I tried to show you, and maybe not that well, were these function expressions. All right, and I used let, but we could have made them a const also, but you see this. All right. And again, one of the reasons that you can do that is JavaScript is somewhat unique in this. Most programming languages do not allow you to use functions like variables. All right? In other words, you can't grab a value and stuff it in there like that, like you can in here. So, I'm going to give you a second, have a read on this. I don't know what page we're on here. We're on the bottom of page 137. I guess they do map up. In the other book, they don't map up correctly. So. Now, when you look at this, there's 5 bullets here. We've already pretty much gone through numbers 1 and 2, first 2 bullets. You don't have to give that function a name. If you don't give it a name, it's known as an anonymous function. All right? We will be working a lot with anonymous functions. Okay? It says you call a function expression using the same techniques as calling a regular function. The only difference is you refer to a function expression using the name of the constant or variable it's assigned to. All right, here's what's new. A function expression can be passed as an argument to another function. When we get into talking about Node and when we make the transition over to Node, this is where this becomes important. I'm going to have to spend at least an entire class period and maybe 2 or 3 class periods going over what's referred to as asynchronous JavaScript programming. All right, and with asynchronous JavaScript programming, when they first started it, they did what were called callbacks. Don't worry about what they are, we're going to look at them. The problem is, with callbacks, the way you have to write them, you literally can get into where a callback and it calls a callback, it calls a callback, etc., and you get into what's called callback hell. Believe it or not, you can actually go out to the internet. I'm not going to do it right now, but there's a callbackhell.com. All right, so they decided to make it better. So rather than using straight callbacks, they created something called promises. And promises are one of 3 things. So let's say that your first semester students, in fact, it would work for third, but let's just say your first semester students. You come into Rankin, sign up for classes, you pay your money. Okay? You expect that when you come in there, the class the first day, that the instructor will be there, and the instructor will be there throughout that semester, and that you'll hopefully learn something. Well, when you pay, if you look at it as far as promises go, your promise is what's called pending. It hasn't been either resolved or rejected yet. It hasn't happened. All right, it's kind of like something in the future or whatever you want to say. If you have a promise and the promise succeeds, it's called resolved. The promise has been resolved. So if you come to class the first day and I'm here or another instructor is here and you start being taught to, then that was resolved. If you come to class the first day and somebody says to you, hey, I'm sorry, we're not going to be able to teach this class. We don't have a teacher. And believe it or not, I maybe shouldn't tell you this. I don't think you care. But they were going to make this class totally online. In fact, they want to change this whole program to be online and have me teach it. And they asked me what I thought. And I said, I have no problem doing that. I said, I think you owe the second year people that you should ask them. And if any of them wanted to be in a regular classroom, that's the way we should have it. But I said, for the new people, the ones starting, and even James and Nick, I said, if you want to go that route, it's okay. If eventually, so you may or may not get this, but the first question I had for Charles was, if you do that, can I work totally from home? That was my question. All right. And he was like, that's to be determined. So this was 2 weeks before we started the semester. They still didn't know what they were doing. So a week before I talked to him, I said, I think that if you're going to do something like that, you better let people. He said, Jeff, don't worry about it. He said, we still have 2 or 3 courses we don't have teachers for yet. All right. This was a week before classes. He said, we're more concerned with that than we are whether or not. So you see that he said, no, you're in the classroom the whole year. All right. Then we'll try to. That'll be something that they'll try to figure out at the end of this year. All right. I have no idea exactly what's going to happen. But going back to this, what you can do is you can pass a function into a function. All right? And what that means is, the reason that that's important is, let's say I write a program and I do this. This is going to be unbelievably simple. So I call function 1, and then I call function 2. I'm not going to write those. We're just going to pretend they exist. And then I'm going to call function 3. The reason that they came up with the idea of asynchronous programming is, let's suppose that this function right here has got to go out to the internet, it's got to go log onto a site, it's got to find a database, it's got to run a query that takes quite a while. Well, function 1 will run, function 2 will run, and it'll take control of the system, and function 3 is sitting there until function 2 returns. That's synchronous programming. With asynchronous programming, what can happen is, we can do this, I can say, okay, you go ahead and do this, but for lack of better words, I'm going to kind of set a timer for you. And when you return, I'll finish whatever it has to be done. But in the meantime, I'm going to go on and do this. All right? And that's really big. That's what Node is all about. All right? That's what makes Node so cool. Node is actually single-threaded, meaning technically it's got some stuff it does in the background. But technically it can only do one thing at a time. But imagine that you could only do one thing at a time, but you had superpowers in that you could do it unbelievably quickly. All right, and if there was something that was going to take time, you could say, okay, I'm going to put that over here, and when I get a little bit of time, I'm going to work on it. See what I'm saying? That's what we're getting into. All right, well, so promises, like I said, could be resolved, meaning they were met, or rejected, meaning they weren't met. All right, time went on, and people said, those are too hard too. So they have replaced, not totally, but you'll still find callbacks out there. You'll still find promises out there. But with a lot of new code, they use what are called Async Await. All right? Async, you put basically inside of the routine or whatever it is you're working with, and you use await with it, which basically says, I'm doing asynchronous programming, and there'll be a wait that's going to be involved in there. All right? And we're going to be going through all that stuff. And I'm not going to lie to you, it may or may not sound simple or not simple. It isn't simple. All right. And going back to what you had talked about, Gabriel, in contrast to a function declaration, a function expression is not hoisted. So what does that mean? That means that there's probably a good chance when I showed you this one, that if I tried putting this one after this, or before this one rather, I would get an error. See what I'm saying? What I mean is, I could probably go and take this code right here with a regular function and literally put it up here, even before I created the variables. Because remember, it goes through, and what hoisting means is it goes through and it finds all this stuff, and it kind of marks it. Oh, there's a variable, there's a constant, etc. It does all that stuff. All right? But with this, I couldn't move this up there because of the way, because this is a function declaration and this is a function expression. And it's in the way that they're handled internally. That's what the author is saying right there. All right? You still have questions, again, that's basically what they're saying in here. Okay. All right. Oh, look, I guess shows you what I know. There's the arrow function. All right. So this is a great, much better example than what I gave you. If you take a look at this, it doesn't look like it buys you a whole heck of a lot in this example right here. And you'll notice, well, you're like, yeah, you put it in one line. If there's only a return statement, you can put it in one line. This has got a calculation and then a return statement. All right? So this is saying function. So that's the name of the function. Or that's, it is saying it's a function. These are the parameters. This is saying it's a function. And these are the name of the parameters. All right? Again, one of the books that I was looking at, and I thought I might have you get for this year, and just telling you that it was out there. And the more I got into it, the more I didn't like it, which is why I'm not even talking about it anymore, other than to say They do it both ways in the book. These two things are exactly the same, except for what you see here as opposed to what you see here. They work exactly the same. Now, as I mentioned, if you only have one parameter, like subtotal here, you don't need the parentheses. You can still use them. If you have no parameters, you do need the parentheses. So if there's no parameters whatsoever, you can't just leave this blank where you've got subtotal here. That'll screw this. You'll get an error. I don't remember what the error is because I tried. All right? And again, if it's a return, that's putting it on one line. So that's probably a better explanation, etc., than what I gave you. So if nothing else, take a look, a gander at page 139, and here's the description for it. I will tell you, it may not seem like it, but we've been going for almost 2 hours, and I probably have introduced at least a half dozen things we haven't had before. All right, the chances of you saying, yep, got them, I'm going to remember every friggin' one of them, I can tell you how they're used, probably aren't that good. That's why, like I said, we'll come up with some exercises or something so you'll get some experience using this stuff. And you'll be spending the rest of the semester using this stuff. All right. Global, local, and block scope. Again, okay, any variable that you declare, whether it's var, which they shouldn't do, or let, or const, any variable that you declare outside of any method is automatically global. And the way JavaScript works, because it has that hoisting, so let's just say you wouldn't, I would never see anybody doing this, but you could. So let's just say in here, so let's say you've got, I don't know, let x equal 3, okay? Then you've got function f1, and you've got some code in here. I'm just going to put ... There's some code in there. I don't care what it is. You could actually come in and say let y equals 7, and then have function 2. I have never seen anybody do that, but to my knowledge, there is nothing that would stop you from doing that. I don't think that would be a good idea, but all I'm telling you is JavaScript is a little unique. Most other programming languages require you to define your variables at the top of the program. JavaScript does not. All right? Says in general, and this is true, this is the big thing about it. You shouldn't have any global variables if you can help it. All right? Now, that said, I'm not going to lie to you. I would guess that last semester, when we were in the Android class, we used global variables a lot. There's no variable police that come out and look at this, but the program runs slower typically if you use global variables because they're saved to a different part of memory than local variables are. Plus, when you've got global variables, you can potentially get what are called side effects. And sometimes a side effect is a good thing. But what a side effect means is if a variable is global, any method in the program can change it, even some that shouldn't be able to change it. But if you make it local and pass it around on an as-needed basis, that's not an issue. All right. Like I said, with this section in here, I would read this. How to handle events. How to attach an event handler to an event. So I would start here on page 142 and read it. Let's take a look at least some of the examples in it. All right. These are events. These are common events. These are not all of the events. The event that most people equate with event handling is a click event for a button. All right. So here's an example of that. What does this say? All right. In English, this says, go out to the HTML and find me, it's probably going to be a button, but find me a button with an ID of submit button. Add an event listener to it, which means when that button is clicked, I want you to call this routine called join list. Don't put parentheses after that. That would actually call it. We don't want to call it. We're sending a message to the system that, hey, what we are hooking on to this button is we are adding an event listener. So the button is sitting there waiting to be clicked. Once you click it, so that's the event. Once you click it, call that routine. That routine better exist or you're going to get an error. All right. And this, like I said, it's typically is one of these. There are other ones. Now, a big one in there that we have not really talked about at all is DOM content loaded. We talked a little about the DOM last year, but not very much. We'll talk more about it. The DOM, again, is the document object model. It's basically something that gets created as the web page is loading. But if you want to make sure that what the DOM does is it allows you to manipulate anything on a web page programmatically. And if you want to make sure that all of that content has been loaded, you want to be 100% certain, you can do that. And not only can you add an event listener, you can remove one. So as it says here, an event handler is a function that executes when the event occurs. To attach it, you use the add event listener. It accepts a string for the name of the event and the function that the event will handle. So notice that name has got to be in either single or double quotes, and the name of the routine is not in quotes. And again, don't put parentheses after the name of the routine. All right. Anonymous functions, we've talked a little about these. An anonymous function like this is a function that doesn't have a name. Now, what's the advantage of using an anonymous function? All right. If you name the function, it's got to be put in a certain part of computer memory, and it's got to be held there because you may call it over and over again. If you know you're going to create a function and you know it's only going to be called once, you can make it anonymous. It goes to a different part of memory, and it actually has the ability to get removed from memory faster. So the program will at least conceivably run faster. All right? But you typically, at least that's the way I was taught, that if you're going to have something like this, if you are going to create, all right, if you are going to create an anonymous function, then the anonymous function should be a one-time only. So an anonymous function is a function that doesn't have a name. To use it, you code the expression as the second parameter of the add event listener method. And they show an example. Here's one right here. So there's the method, and boom, you just put it in there. You call it. There's nothing wrong with putting in the name of a routine in here. And if you're going to be calling it over and over again, that's the way you should do it. If you're only going to do it once, you can still do it the other way, but this is a way that'll make the program, ideally at least, run a little faster. This is about the event object, if you want to read that. Now, can somebody tell me, don't even look at this. Why would you use this? Anybody want to take a guess? Prevent default. Can you think of a time you might want to use that? How about if you click a button and that button is designed when you click it to go to another website or to another page or something, but there's been an error. Or you're testing and you don't want it to go to another page. By calling that routine, it prevents the default action. So again, it's oftentimes used with the href attribute, with input tags, and with button tags. And when you do this, it's got something connected to it that's called an event. You can call this E, you can call it event, you can call it EVT. I mean, you can call it whatever you want, but it's typically either called E or EVT or event. And it's got a lot of stuff associated with it. You can actually go out to console log and print this out, and it's got scores of different things that are connected to it that you can look at. All right. So another miles per gallon. Another email list. It's not hung. Looks like it is hung. Very good. Okay. All right. We're going to take another break in just a couple minutes, but before we do, because it's very hot in here, if it gets too hot, we can't open that. It's just, I didn't know if that would bug people. How to test and debug a JavaScript application. The only thing I want to say about that, and I mentioned this to you before, and that is the fact that we are not going to be using alerts for things. We're going to be using console.log. And to make it even more, not difficult, but a little different, we've already shown you this, that if you go out to a web page, you right mouse click and you choose inspect, I can at any time, I can go to the console here. Don't worry about it, cannot set, that's no big thing. But I can come in here and type in let age equal 10. Now, it comes back and it says undefined because it's trying to return something and there's nothing to return. But if I come in here and I say either, for example, I can say alert age, and there it is, no big thing there. All right, or I can say console.log age, and it again gives me 10 right here, or I can just say age, and it'll give me 10 as well. All right, so who cares? The point is we're going to be using console.log, and there's going to be two of them. There's going to be the console.log, the one we're working with now, that's the console.log for the client. But we're also going to have a console.log for the server. The reason that's important is when we run our node programs, we're going to run them from a console. All right? All right. So I'm going to try to fix this. Let's take a break and let's come back. Let's make it about 5 after 2. And we'll just go through 6 today. I'll just stop right there. But I want to go through this, how to script the DOM with JavaScript. If I can get this to work again. I don't know what's going on. What's going on with it. So.